Every creative, whether you work in a film school or an advertising firm, they need to understand what story is. That's what we're all doing. In the screen industry, things have already changed. You know, we had a conversation with one of our editing tutors. She was talking to our students about fundamentals of editing workflow, and then she said, but you know, obviously that can just be done in AI.
Are you quite optimistic in the long run, or do you think that it's going to become so functional that we'll just default to it?
So will video kill the radio star, is what you're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And it's,
AI
well, you know, well, it didn't. Some roles are going to go. That's the reality. It is an industrial revolution, and that will probably cause some unrest.
Hi, my name is Allan. I'm the co-founder and managing director of Target 3D. So we're very excited for Rory Curley, CEO of Central Film School, to be with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Rory, I wonder if we could start, just how did you get into running a film school?
I think that slightly classic, figuratively running away with the circus situation. So I did a lot of teaching abroad after I went to university, taught in Japan, then I taught in China as well. And I sort of slipped into education when I returned back to Ireland while doing law exams, in essence. And I went into student recruitment and then into directorship roles. And then I received a phone call from a recruiter saying, would you like to run a film school? And a single tear rolled down my cheek, and I said, yes.
You know, part of the reason we're here today is you have invested in technology which we've provided to your film school, including motion capture and similar to this, you know, big virtual production volume.
Yeah.
And so like, we're really interested as part of this series is really trying to understand the utility of the tech. You know, we get excited by the pixels and the frame rates and, you know, what the tech can do, but really what's more interesting for audiences, I think, is the actual outcomes from the tech. So I can wonder if you could just tell us a bit about how you're using it within Central Film School and what that's done for the students and the teaching curricula.
So yeah, so I did research on, I suppose, market leaders within the sector and see how storytelling was evolving and is still evolving. And that led me to be looking at motion capture and at virtual production as well. We worked with you guys really, really extensively to build that vision for how we could meld technology with, you know, students achieving their objectives and being ready to be the future innovators within the screen industries. So that's sort of how we came about getting the technology. And then I suppose I was like, okay, let's reverse engineer a pathway. So I know what the objective is. I want students to have these future storytelling skills that they can use in the industry. And then how do I make sure that actually they acquire those skills? Because I think the key thing is, and maybe, you know, one of the challenges that some higher education institutions have had is that the space is moving so quickly, and then it's like, okay, get it, just get the technology. And then you've got teams who don't know how to use it.
Yeah.
You've got curricula that don't incorporate it explicitly. And so I think the thing that we realized fairly early on was that we had to write in this technology through new courses, but also through integrating the technology into our established courses as well. That's been really, really, really key.
And so kind of like mixing the old with the new, the traditional with the contemporary coming along.
Absolutely.
Was that difficult?
Well, it's easy peasy because you know people in academia love change. You know what? I think actually you have to get buy-in from the academic community. That's really, really key. And you have to, you know, really demonstrate that these are tools that are going to enhance and augment your storytelling ability. You know, at Central Film School is known as, we are a classical narrative-focused institution, I would say. In no way, shape or form have we moved away from storytelling. Tell your story is our tagline. It's the center of what we do completely within the school. The key thing was I wanted students to have every single tool available to tell every single kind of story that they could possibly tell, and to tell stories in new, innovative and ways that would speak to, you know, different demographics and younger demographics.
And so it's providing them with the variety, they have access to it where that interest takes them, but they learn the fundamentals. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. You know, this is still a bit of a moving feast for us. You know, our VP was only installed 9 months ago in the school. Actually, yeah. It's still quite, I mean, that's a millennia, obviously, in the way, and the speed that technology is changing, but it's still relatively new for us. It's our first year that we've had it. We're just completing our first module, which is a virtual production module, which we integrated into our practical filmmaking degree. So, do they just get to choose it? No. It's a short answer. And actually, you have to bring them to it and introduce them to it. I think that's really, really important. If we're really committed to actually embedding this technology into what we do, then actually it's not optional. It's just, we say you will learn classical form, but you'll also learn these new forms as well. I think something that we're still interrogating to some extent is how much of the workings we're getting students to show. It's a bit like that old school maths thing where, you know, you got some points for giving the correct answer, but you also got a lot of points for showing the workings. That's a really important part of understanding the craft and really understanding technology, actually, is to go a bit analog first and say what actually is the analog workflow, and then what's the technology do to that in a sense. The example I give to students is, you know, you look at Picasso and you look at his early work, his Blue Period, etc. Sorry for talking about Picasso in this technological one, but you look at his Blue Period and he was a wonderful, incredible, precise, figurative painter. And then he broke all the rules, or then he did it in a totally different way. And it's similar for the technology as well. Actually, I do want students to be able to sketch out a storyboard, but obviously AI is driving a lot of storyboard creation now, and that's really important. But learn the workings first and then move on to the technology. Because then actually you're the boss of the technology in a way, and you can improve and enhance the technology because you understand the workings of it. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, because I mean, it takes us onto that whole discussion around AI, because AI is this thing which offers such wonderful shortcuts to people to create content. So yeah, it's really interesting that as an institution, you're still keeping those kind of fundamentals. And I suppose it's a juxtaposition, because if AI is going to take over, do the students ever really need to know how to storyboard, if you know what I mean? If they're just going to get AI to do it. But I suppose the fundamental knowledge is key.
I think so, and I think that the usage and the facility of shortcuts, your time in life, your time in your career, your place in your experience is really, really important to that. But if you haven't gone the process of, if you're using it as it is the knowledge creator, as opposed to it is collecting or shortcutting for me to speed things up, for example, to make it more efficient. They're two very, very different processes. So therefore, we go back to learn the fundamentals. We must be intentional in how we utilize it, as opposed to it just sort of floods over us and we don't have the reins.
Are you quite optimistic in the long run, or do you think we'll get sucked into the fact that it's so ubiquitous that it's going to become so functional that we'll just default to it? Or do you think the human creativity will always kind of shine through?
Well, so will video kill the radio star? Is what you're asking me.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it didn't. You know, that's the whole thing. And so I'm definitely optimistic. Look, the thing is though, adaptability is the key skill now. And actually, because things are moving at such a fast pace, let's say if you think you're going to be doing the same things that you were doing now in not even 20 years time, in 5 years time, you're lying to yourself. And people really, really need to engage with that. So I think that's really the key thing. Also, humanity, there are examples of humanity not taking the perceived easiest option or the perceived technological option. A really good example, obviously, the rise of vinyl. Again, it's happening now, but of course, you know, books have never been selling more, because there is something else to a creative experience, and tactility and, you know, bodily experience in creativity is still something that people actually are aligned to. In the screen industries, things have already changed. That's the thing. It's not like, oh, they're going to change soon. Like, they're already changed. You know, we had a conversation with one of our editing tutors. She was talking to our students about fundamentals of editing workflow. And then she said, but you know, obviously that can just be done in AI now. And that actually was the nexus of the conversation about showing the workings and then moving on to the tool, basically. So we want them to understand that edit workflow. But if we want our students to be ready for the world of work, we must introduce them to what's being used in industry now. And I think, you know, some roles are going to go. That's the reality. Like you know, it is an industrial revolution, and that will probably cause some unrest to some extent, as the agrarian and industrial revolutions did, because these changes are difficult because there's sectoral shifts are quicker than, you know, people change careers, right? Okay, and reskill and all those kinds of things. And so it's all about quickly reskilling as soon as we can. But I think what will happen in terms of things that are created, a good example is a handmade table or a factory-made table. What happens is that, you know, people will pay significantly more for the story of the artifact, and that means something to me.
And it's made by a craft person who's got skill.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and that's appreciated. Or I might get something from IKEA, which is perfectly functional. No tea, no shade, not IKEA. I love you. You're great. But in the world of creativity and art, I think there will be, to some extent, that kind of tension between those two things, or those choices being made.
I agree with that, and it seems that's the way it's going to go. And I suppose if there's something which is formulaic and repeatable, maybe some kind of advertisements, then it's part of what the audience might care and appreciate. But if you're being engaged in quite an emotional story, I suppose you may need the human input to craft that to elicit emotion from the viewer.
Yeah, I think so, but I think like the provenance actually of the artifact as well. That's what people are like. People buy into the provenance actually. That that gives more meaning to the piece of art as well, whether it be a story or a visual story or a chair or whatever.
Yeah, no. So, in addition to kind of AI skills and workflows, what other things are you sort of inspiring your students to have to get involved in or to get up to speed with?
For us, it's thinking about portfolio career, thinking about have depth of skill but also have breadth of skill. I think that's really, really important. We started an acting for screen degree 2 years ago, and it's quite distinct from other acting degrees because there's loads of filmmaking in it. And we get them to actually do editing, and they learn these basic skills. They hold a boom and all those kinds of things. And also, thinking outside the box. Obviously, acting for screen, most of our students want to be film actors who are coming onto it, obviously film and or television. But for example, the virtual actor module, Idris Elba, Oscar nominated, hugely prestigious actor, did a full performance for a computer game. And that's a really interesting thing actually, particularly for film, that melding between sort of screen stories and the gaming industry. And we're trying to integrate that more and more into our student psyche. So that's why we talk about screen more than film actually, because the borders are blurring.
Yeah. And also I suppose a lot of games nowadays are quite cinematic.
100%.
Particularly the cutscenes and are needing, they support the stories as the game players go along with that. What's one old school skill you refuse to let students skip?
So understanding a story structure. The hero's journey, 3 acts, building tension. Every creative, whether you work in a film school or an advertising firm or whatever, they need to understand what story is. That's what we're all doing. Creatives are telling stories, whether it's through a lump of clay or it's through some pixels on the screen.
The other question, which is probably partly impossible to answer maybe, but fast forward 5 years, what job title will exist in film schools that doesn't exist today?
I mean, I think this already exists, to be honest. My understanding is it's not very widely sort of used in film schools yet. Something along the lines of virtual production artist or something along those lines. But in the sense of more like the production design. It was interesting, like the Guild of Production Designers had put out a message a year or 2 ago saying that they stopped taking people on because there were so many massive transitions within that sector.
Right.
In terms of opportunities. So we have a production design specialism in our BA Practical Filmmaking, but we want to turn it into much more about virtual production.
Thank you, Rory, for coming by and taking part in our YouTube series. In terms of Central Film School itself, how can people find out a bit more about you in terms of where would you want them to go to find out more information?
centralfilmschool.com. To be honest, the best way to get a feeling for what the school is like is to go into our socials. We're on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. LinkedIn if you want a bit more business, and I'm sometimes on the LinkedIn, but if you want to get the vibe from the students and their experience, how they're feeling, our Instagram or TikTok are the best, for sure.
And look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. Grand.
We had an intern who 2 years ago was building a small demo of physiotherapy, and then he took our devices, started knocking on therapist doors in London, went into Chartered Society of Physiotherapists.